Millivan's welcome sign was still that same sun-bleached blue, featuring a fighting Whippet mascot that looked as tired and chalky as he remembered. Despite being away for 4 years and what felt like several lifetimes, the place hadn't changed a bit. Dylan took the turn onto County Line Road, his hands moving with practiced ease. He was finally back. The air had a sharp mineral quality that immediately brought back memories of old heartbreaks. Every window he passed seemed to trigger a new flashback, from his first hidden beer to the bridge where he originally came out to Nate as an Omega. That spot was currently blocked off with orange cones, but he blew right past the detour sign. He'd always been pretty good at ignoring things he didn't want to deal with. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Lou. She was a mess of limbs in her booster seat, fast asleep with a bit of drool on her chin. Her hair, a wilder version of his, spread against the seat. She'd managed to lose a shoe after their lost stop, leaving her dirt-smudged toes poking out. She was clutching Jur, her stuffed octopus named after her favorite ice cream flavor, which Dylan had never fully decoded. The octopus was also, at this point, a health concern. He'd wash it tonight. He drove past the park, home to countless soccer games and a controversial new dog fountain, and found a spot under the big oak tree by the library. The lot was deserted except for an old white pickup. He killed the engine and just sat there in the quiet. His best friend and business partner Theo's annoying ringtone started buzzing in the glove box, but he didn't bother answering. He just leaned his head back and looked at the car's ceiling. Someone had tried to fix the fabric with red thumbtacks, but one had fallen out, leaving a tiny hole right above him. If the rental place tried to charge for it, he'd probably just pay. It felt like a fitting detail for the day. 4 years ago, he'd left Millivan with a toddler, a single suitcase, and a specific kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to prove to yourself because you've already been proven the worst. He'd finished his degree in Lisbon. He'd built the Gilt from a shared dream in Theo's inheritance and his own stubborn refusal to be the cautionary tale Nate had seemed to expect. He'd grown into someone he actually recognized when he looked in the mirror. He was back because Lou deserved to understand her roots. With his mother happy in Portugal and his father buried here, Millivan remained the only spot on Earth where he felt a true connection to the land. It turns out you can start fresh somewhere new, but still need a trip back home to really appreciate how far you've come. 14 Wren Street looked exactly the same from the outside. The blue shutters, the overgrown hydrangeas his mother planted the summer he was 12, the small porch where his father used to drink his coffee in silence while watching the neighborhood wake up. Dylan grew up in that house, and after his father died and the estate settled, it was the only thing left. His mother signed it over when she remarried. This was his inheritance, the only one. He'd added Nate to the deed during their first year of marriage, the kind of impulsive, trusting move you make when you're 22 and convinced that love is enough. The house looked cozy, with the blue flicker of a TV visible through the front window. Dylan parked, took a breath to steady himself, and walked up to the door. A man in his 40s wearing a fleece vest answered with a polite confusion. "Sorry to bother you," said Dylan, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "I'm Dylan Wate. I used to live here, and I was just curious how long you've been in the house." The man blinked. "Oh, we actually bought the place about 8 months ago." "Bought it?" Dylan asked, the shock surfacing. "From who?" "The owner, a Mr. Nate Hale. Is there a problem?" "No, don't worry about it," Dylan mumbled with a forced smile. "Thanks anyway. Have a good day." He walked back to the car, got in, sat very still. Lou shifted in the back seat, clutching Gerald's tighter in her sleep. Dylan pulled out his phone and called Theo. It rang once. "Dill?" Theo's voice lively and playful. "Are you alive?" "Theo, he sold my house." "He what? You're kidding," Theo replied. "There is a family living in it," Dylan spat. "He even had to take this away from me." "Come to my place," Theo suggested. "We can sort out a plan later and make sure that prick gets what comes to him." Dylan's jaw locked. "We are going to need to obliterate him out of existence." "Love that energy," Theo said. "Come soon. There's a casserole with your name on it, and I mean that literally." Dylan turned the key, the engine's rumble a low growl that matched the heat rising in his chest. He pulled away from the curb without a second glance, leaving the blue shutters and the stolen memories in the rearview mirror. Inside the cabin, his sense shifted, the bergamot sharpening, turning acrid and dark until it was nothing but smoke. This was it. War. First impression. The back office of the Gilt smelled like coffee grounds, turpentine, and the ghost of last night's gin. Dylan Wate hunched over a freshly printed canvas, sleeves bunched to the elbows, brush gliding through the painting and adding dimension to the digital design he'd finished the night before. Across the room, Theo Kolber was an arrangement of practiced disarray, one foot on the desk, pen twirling over a battered MacBook. He looked up, voice cutting through the quiet. "Champ," he tossed a pale blue envelope across the table. It was thick, impossibly crisp, the Halen and Raymer Investments logo a smug rectangle in the buttery light. "Guess who just booked the big room for June 2nd? Dylan stilled, the brush tip pressed hard against the canvas. He didn't need to open it. Nate? The name tasted like rust. Theo knocked back a cold mouthful of espresso. "The prodigal ex returns to get piss-drunk under your own hand-blown light fixtures. Poetic, right?" Dylan set the brush down and picked up the envelope, jaw tight. He'd spent weeks trying to engineer the perfect first move, a way back in. Now the opportunity had walked through the front door on its own. "Didn't we say the Gilt was neutral ground?" Theo watched him, eyes glinting with something between camaraderie and anarchy. "He doesn't know you co-own the place. He'd have never made the reservation otherwise. We need the booking fees, and you've got a front row seat." He shrugged. "Why waste it?" "You're sure about this? Don't get caught, and if you go nuclear, do it properly." Dylan had expected a lecture. Think of Lou, it's not worth it. Instead, Theo was handing him a match. He closed the ledger with a slap and reached for his jacket. "What, now?" Theo arched his brow. "I'm picking up Lou," Dylan said, grabbing his coat, "and I'm going to spend the whole drive figuring out exactly how to ruin Nate's night." Theo grinned. "That's the spirit. Get him." Dylan took one last look at their workspace, the messy, creative heart of their business, and headed out. He was ready for this, years of frustration finally turning into a sharp sense of purpose. On a good night, the Gilt was electric, but tonight's private event felt a bit more stiff and performative. The venue looked great, moody lighting on the art and plenty of high-end drinks going around. The guest list was a mix of corporate types in suits and the occasional casual Friday rebel. Staff stayed busy with trays of appetizers while the usual networking small talk filled the room. Working the floor, Dylan kept things running smoothly while keeping an eye out for Nate. He eventually spotted him by the sculptures, acting like the natural center of attention. He looked exactly as expected, perfectly groomed and completely comfortable in a room full of finance professionals. Dylan felt a familiar wave of nerves but kept his cool, grabbing a drink to settle in. When Nate finally noticed him, his expression shifted from brief surprise to a calculated, neutral mask. It was a routine Dylan knew well. Nate was already thinking several steps ahead. Dylan didn't bother with a smile. He raised the champagne in a silent toast, then kept moving. 5 minutes later, Nate peeled away from his admirers and slipped toward the back hallway, the one with exposed piping and a floor that was never quite level. Dylan waited a moment, then followed. Nate was waiting outside, posture perfect, one eyebrow arched in polite confusion. "Can I help you with something?" "You always had the manners of a serial killer." Nate raked a cold, indifferent gaze over him. "I'm here for the event. Don't be tedious. This isn't the place for your theatrics." "It's the only place left," Dylan replied, jaw tight. "You've ghosted my legal team for weeks. Consider this a crash course in the consequences you're dodging." Nate's mouth twitched. "I almost admired the stories you constructed in your head." "Are you seriously continuing to deny the lies, cheating, that you tried to trade me as a favor to your friends?" Dylan asked, chest tightening. Nate dropped his mask, tucking his phone away. "Grow up. You got your cut and the kid. Why are you still obsessed?" Dylan stepped closer. "Because you took my house." Nate flinched back, not far, but enough. The move was involuntary, and that was all the permission Dylan needed. The first punch caught him on the jaw, fast, flat, definitive. The sound cut clean through the muffled music from the main hall. Nate's head snapped sideways. He staggered, one hand clawing at the wall. "Jesus," Nate hissed, straightening, wiping a thin line of blood from his lip. Dylan hit him again hard to the gut. Nate doubled, breath wheezing out. A third blow caught the base of his chin and sent him sprawling into the exposed brick. No clever retorts now, just the scrabble of expensive shoes on unfinished concrete. Dylan shook out his hand, fingers ringing. "You forgot who threw the first punch the night we met. I put 3 guys on the ground for you. You mistook patience and care for weakness." Nate stayed hunched, breathing ragged, something close to fear trying to hide behind the familiar mask. "You always had a talent for dramatics," he managed, voice rough. "Take one to no one, Nate. I want my house back." "Dream on. This place is pocket change compared to what that divorce cost me." Dylan lunged again. Nate was tall and broad, but he wasn't a fighter. His counterattacks were wide and weak, and it didn't take long for Dylan to break through them. He was completely focused on what he was doing until he heard footsteps behind him. "Stop," a deep voice steadily called. "What's happening here?" Dylan didn't bother looking back. He ducked another one of Nate's clumsy attempts and shouted over his shoulder for the newcomer to mind his own business. "That's my employee," the voice now sounded a bit more sharp. Dylan shoved Nate against the wall and finally turned around. Standing in the doorway was a tall man who looked like he had been professionally designed. Broad shoulders, a perfectly tailored suit, and a very defined jawline. His dark eyes were trying to stay authoritative despite his obvious shock, and the scent of amber and cold mint followed him into the alley. "Lucky you," Dylan said, not hiding his annoyance. "Unless you want to be next, I'd keep moving." The alpha stepped closer with a calm, measured pace. He stopped a few feet away, looked at Nate's messed-up shirt, and then turned his attention back to Dylan. "This is my event," he said. "You need to leave or I'm calling the police." Dylan stood his ground. "He's my ex-husband, and he deserved this. Call whoever you want, but maybe ask your golden boy what he actually did first." The man's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I don't excuse violence, but I do look out for my team." He looked at Nate again and then back at Dylan. "If you have a problem, we can deal with it like adults or through lawyers." "I did lawyers," Dylan said. "Didn't work out for me." "Suit yourself," the voice was glass smooth, "but you're done here." He reached out, and without thinking, Dylan spun. His foot caught the man square in the stomach, driving him back into the wall. The thud was solid. The man barely grunted. He caught himself, straightened, and watched with a blank, stunned expression. Dylan turned back to Nate, who hadn't moved, still slumped against the brick. "Give me back my house by the end of the month," Dylan said, voice cold, "or I make your life a living hell." Nate's hand dropped, his whole frame sagging. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." Dylan leaned in close. "See what I've got left to lose." He turned on his heel, shouldered past the amber and mint alpha, who, to his credit, simply stepped aside, and walked back into the bar without looking back. Not once. "Are you a masochist or what?" Dylan Wate entered the Holland & Raymer lobby at 10:43 a.m., portfolio case slung over one shoulder, coffee in hand. The space gleamed with white marble and indirect lighting, held in the kind of silence that cost money to maintain. He disliked the cold, polished perfection immediately, even if the high ceilings were a canvas waiting to happen. Seeing the building's name prominently displayed on the back wall only made it worse. It kept reminding him of Nate's old business cards in that leather holder on the nightstand. Nathan Hale, Senior Allocations Manager, Holland & Raymer. Dylan inhaled deeply, grounding himself with the thought that his presence here was purely for business. The opportunity was massive. A major art piece for the Holland & Raymer atrium was a career-making prospect, given their high-profile clientele. Between the money and the prestige, he knew it was a win. The discounted price, Theo's version of an apology for the bar incident, felt a little weird, but he'd been clear. It was business, and the deal was just too good to turn down. "Don't blow this," Theo had warned that morning, his expression as grave as a surgeon's while handing over the portfolio. "Just confirm the design, sign the papers, play along, and for heaven's sakes, keep your hands to yourself." "That was a one-off," Dylan had countered. "Well, Zane Raymer certainly didn't see it that way," Theo replied. There was no arguing that. Dylan could only curse the rotten luck of accidentally assaulting a high-ranking executive. At the reception desk, a poised young woman with a sleek headset offered a practiced, professional smile. "Dylan Wate, Gilt Art Studio," he announced, placing his coffee on the glassy counter. "I'm here for a 10:50 meeting with marketing and facilities." She checked her monitor and nodded. "Certainly, Mr. Wate, conference room C on the 3rd floor. Take the elevators to your left and follow the hallway to the 2nd door on your right." "Thanks," Dylan said, retrieving his coffee as he headed toward the elevators. The building's interior opened up past the reception desk into a wide corridor that split into 2 directions, one branch lined with glass-walled offices, the other leading deeper into what appeared to be a large open-plan workspace. He took the left fork toward the elevators and slowed. The open workspace was humming with the particular mid-morning energy of a department between meetings. People sat at clusters of desks, laptops open, coffees half-finished. A few stood at a standing-height counter along one wall, talking in the low, easy way of people who'd run out of urgency hours ago. Dylan didn't mean to eavesdrop, he was simply walking past. "Honestly, can't believe they're letting the studio in considering the whole situation." He slowed down, just a fraction. "What situation?" another voice asked, sounding mildly curious. "Oh, come on, you haven't heard?" A conspiratorial drop in volume that carried anyway, because the acoustic design of open-plan offices was a lie. "Nate was attacked by his ex-husband at the last quarterly event. That studio belongs to him." Dylan's grip on his coffee cup tightened. "Wait, the one who cheated on him?" "Exactly. Nate's even questioning the kid's paternity. Apparently, the Omega wasn't exactly loyal during those last years." He stopped. Not consciously, his feet just wouldn't move anymore. The voices continued, unbothered, unaware that the subject of their conversation had paused 6 feet away with his back to them. "That's awful. So why is the company doing business with him?" "Word is someone at the top insisted on it. Who knows? You'd imagine Nate would have some influence, seeing as..." Dylan forced himself to keep moving, taking one heavy step after another. He stared straight ahead with gritted teeth, struggling to stay calm. They were talking about Lou. Lou was his entire world, a vibrant 6-year-old who carried none of the bitterness of their failed marriage, yet Nate was willing to make her a casualty of his own ego? It wasn't just the slander, it was the betrayal of the history they shared. How could someone he once called home turn into a stranger who looked at his own daughter and saw nothing but a weapon to be used against an ex-husband? Dylan stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. He stared at his reflection in the mirrored panel, jaw tight, eyes too bright, struggling to maintain the professional mask he desperately needed. Dylan took a deep breath, centering himself. He was here for the contract and his studio's future, not to detonate. The elevator opened on the 3rd floor. Dylan stepped out, adjusted the strap of his portfolio case, and followed the corridor toward the 2nd door on the right. He pushed open the door to conference room C. The room was a standard corporate. Oval table, ergonomic chairs, a wall of windows that looked out over the city, and a whiteboard that faintly smelled of fresh marker. A pitcher of water sat in the center of the table alongside a small stack of folders. 3 people were sitting at the table. Dylan didn't know 2 of them. They introduced themselves as Cassie from marketing and Garrett from facilities. They both gave him quick, friendly smiles, looking relieved that he was on time for their busy schedules. The 3rd chair held someone Dylan knew very well. Nate sat at the end of the table with his arms crossed, looking smug as if he'd planned a surprise. "Well," Nate grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Good to see you, Dylan." Dylan laid his portfolio case on the conference table. He chose a seat by the door, several chairs away from Nate, and sat down. He stayed calm, even though it wasn't easy. "Cassie, Garrett," he started, directing himself entirely to them. "Good to meet you both. I've reviewed the atrium specs, and I have some preliminary concepts I think you'll find interesting." He set the folder on the table. He opened it. He kept his eyes off the end of the table. Cassie reached for the concept sketches with genuine interest. "These are beautiful. The textural layering, is that mixed media?" "Resin casting over canvas panels with embedded elements. The light in that atrium is extraordinary. I want to use it. I want to talk about the budget, Nate interrupted. Dylan turned a page in his folder. I thought Garrett handled that with Theo. Actually, Nate smirked, I approve budgets for these projects. Surprise, you might want to be nicer to me. Garrett fidgeted in his seat. Cassie seemed to find the window fascinating. Dylan finally looked up, meeting Nate's eyes directly for the first time. I'm always professional. Being nice is different. This price is way too high, especially considering the situation, Nate replied, pausing for effect. The price was decided by people above you, and it included a gesture of goodwill after that incident. If you have a problem with it, talk to my manager. I'm done talking about it. Dylan's voice was even and low. I'm here to do business for my studio, not to beg. See, that's always been your problem. Nate unfolded his arms and leaned forward. You never knew how to read a room. I'm the one in charge here. Then I'd suggest you read your room. Dylan set his pen down and looked at Nate steadily, because you're making everyone uncomfortable here. You're the one making this difficult. Cassie made a small sound that might have been the beginning of an excuse to leave the room. What's the goal here? Settling a grudge through a business deal? If that's how you want to play it, fine. So answer this. Why haven't you called my lawyer back about the house, the one you sold without my consent or a single signature from me? A flicker crossed to Nate's face. Not guilt, he wasn't capable of it, but the sudden focus of a player who just realized he'd missed a move on the board. Why are you bringing this up? Nate's jaw tightened. You are unreasonable. Am I? The word was sharper than Dylan intended, but he didn't apologize. Your colleagues are out there talking about me cheating and you denying our daughter like it's just casual office gossip. People talk, was Nate's only response. Are you for real? Dylan's voice dropped. Whatever story you've made up to feel better about the divorce, fine, but Lou is off limits. She isn't a weapon for you to use. You were barely what? Dylan challenged. Nate let the silence hang. An omega, he said finally. It sounded like he was finally admitting a long-held secret. You didn't look the part. No charm, no softness, always pushing back. I tried to tolerate me? To work with what I had. Dylan watched him, feeling distant. It was like finally seeing the whole picture. He'd spent years devoted to this man, keeping their home together and giving him everything. To see Nate toss that all away just to polish his corporate image was a level of cruelty Dylan couldn't wrap his head around. He didn't feel angry. He just felt a sudden, sharp clarity. So, that's who you are. I see. I'm not trying to be cruel, Nate added. You don't have to try. Dylan closed his presentation folder and picked up his portfolio case. He moved toward the door. You need this contract, Nate said to his back. Dylan paused with his hand on the door handle. No, we don't. He glanced back. Cassie, Garrett, thank you for your time. I'll have my studio manager follow up on this contract. He opened the door and walked out. Dylan was 3 steps into the corridor when the door behind him opened again. We're not finished, Nate said. Dylan kept walking. I am. Dylan. The voice shifted, lower, edged with something primal and instinctive. Stop. He should have kept walking. Later, he'd look back at this moment and wonder how different things would be if he had. But Nate's voice carried something deeper, something chemical. Before Dylan's brain could even process it, his body reacted to the rush of alpha pheromones. It was sharp and heavy, the biological command to submit, stay, and comply. His steps faltered involuntarily, his shoulders pulled back. He hated that feeling. That doesn't work on me anymore, Dylan told him. He turned to face Nate, though his voice was a little raspy and his chest felt heavy. The hallway smelled like Nate's citrus scent and cold authority, a combination that always reminded him of their worst fights. Nate closed the distance between them. We're finishing this conversation. There's nothing. A hand closed around his arm and pulled him over. Dylan stumbled. His pulse raced as Nate's scent filled the air, but his mind stayed clear and angry. He hated when his body betrayed him like this. Let go. You're going to let go. Nate's grip tightened. It was the kind of hold that meant, I'm in charge here. Dylan looked at the hand on his arm, then met Nate's eyes. The pheromones were like a heavy current trying to drag him under. But instead of pulling back, Dylan stepped into the space. He used a sharp rotation to snap the grip, just like his dad had shown him. He shoved Nate hard and didn't wait around to see the reaction. Touch me again and I swear, a hand caught his arm mid-swing. The grip came from behind and slightly above him, firm and steady. Dylan spun. In a fraction of a second, his body, already fighting Nate's chemistry, made a series of lightning-fast assessments. Threat, large, alpha, in his space. Before he could even think, he moved. He grabbed the newcomer's arm, dropped his weight, and used the alpha's own momentum against him in a clean over-the-shoulder throw. Wait, Dylan recognized that face. Zane Raymer, the big shot he'd kicked at the bar. Too late. Zane hit the floor with a heavy thud that vibrated through the floorboards. Silence. Dylan was so screwed. Zane just lay there on his back, staring at the ceiling like a man rethinking his entire life. He didn't look hurt, just genuinely surprised, which was notable because Zane didn't seem like the type to be caught off guard. Dylan looked down at him, breathing harder than he should have, his pulse still hammering from adrenaline and the leftover sting of Nate's pheromones. Are you a masochist or something? Why do you keep getting in the middle of my fights? Zane opened his mouth, then closed it. Dylan grabbed his portfolio, straightened his jacket, and walked away without looking back. Behind him, he could hear Nate's voice, all that authority gone, replaced by a lot of genuine concern. He stepped into the elevator, and finally, he was alone. His hands steadied, and his heart found its rhythm again. Then he noticed it, a trace of something warm and soothing in the air. It wasn't Nate's scent. It was something entirely different. Amber and a refreshing mint. It was clinging to the air, or his jacket, or maybe even his own skin from the moment he'd grabbed Zane's arm for the throw. The pheromones were protective, a burst of calm that was utterly unlike Nate's chemistry. Dylan stood perfectly still. His body, which had been running on pure rage and survival for the last 20 minutes, did something deeply inconvenient. It relaxed. He stared at the floor numbers as they counted down. 3, 2. Oh, he thought. No. I truly screwed up. How was he ever going to explain this to Theo? The last time he'd messed up like this, Theo's scolding lasted, with small breaks, for almost 2 days. Dylan had eventually hidden in the studio's supply closet with a noise-canceling headphones and a granola bar to wait it out. Even then, Theo had found him and delivered a 20-minute lecture through the door. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened to the white marble and groomed trees. Dylan walked straight out the revolving doors and into the city air, leaving the scent of amber and mint behind. I like whatever is wrong with you. Saturday mornings at the Gilt had a specific kind of beauty. It was that peaceful window before the city fully woke up, when the light slanted through the front windows and the air smelled like faded candles, fresh coffee, and the faint, permanent scent of dried paint. Dylan loved these hours. Usually, Thea would be setting up, Lou would be hiding somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, and the jazz on the speakers stayed low enough to let a person think. Dylan had been out since 8 running errands, but when he pushed through the back door with his arms full of paper bags, the first thing he heard was his daughter's voice. No, that's not how you carry the one. Look, you have to move it up here. Dylan set the bags on the counter and peered through the archway into the lounge. Lou was at the corner table by the window, her mouth workbook open. Beside her, sleeves rolled up and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, sat Zane Raymer. Dylan just stared. Zane was listening to a 6-year-old with total seriousness. He nodded, adjusted his glasses, and scribbled something in the margin of the book. Much better, Lou declared with the confidence of someone who never doubted herself. Dylan turned toward the bar where Theo was polishing a glass with theatrical calm. Theo? Dylan? What is he doing here? Theo shrugged, not looking up from the glass. He showed up 40 minutes ago and asked for you. I told him you'd be back soon. He paused, glancing toward the window. Lou seems to have taken a liking to him. Dylan looked back. Lou was drawing on a notepad now, and Zane was watching her with a focused, slight smile. There's something else, Theo added. Of course there is. He's one of the private investors in the Gilt, has been for a while. Theo let that sink in. Also, and you might want to sit down, he's bought all 4 of your pieces, the ones from the Millivan collection. He bought them privately through a broker before the gallery show even opened. Dylan went still, his brow furrowing. Why didn't you tell me this last time? You've never cared about that stuff before, and he used a broker. I only found out recently because I had to deal with the fallout of you assaulting him. Well, I hope he's not here to sue us. No, he'd sue you, Theo corrected, and you'd deserve it. Dylan glared and pushed the groceries across the bar. Useless friend, take these to the kitchen. Theo gave him a mock salute, grabbed the bags, and headed for the back. Across the room, Lou held up her drawing. Zane leaned in to study the drawing, murmuring something Dylan couldn't catch. Whatever it was made Lou absolutely beam. Dylan let out a long sigh, accepted his fate, and walked toward them. "Daddy!" Lou exclaimed. She slid off her chair and hugged his leg. Then she pointed back at Zane. "This is my new friend. He got here while you were gone, so I took care of him." Dylan looked at Zane, who rose with the calm of a man who had decided to just go with the flow. "Mr. Raymer," Dylan greeted him. "Mr. Wate." They shook hands. Zane's grip was firm and professional. His scent was warm and woody with a cool, refreshing edge. Dylan was surprised he could even pick it up, since the man didn't seem to be emitting any pheromones. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. "I'm gonna take Mr. Raymer upstairs for a bit, okay? Theo's got your juice." "Okay." Lou grabbed her workbook, then stopped. She looked up at Zane, giving him a complete, uncomplicated assessment. Then she announced to the entire room, "I like him. He's handsome and smart, and he smells like minty bubble tea." Dylan chuckled, feeling a heat crawl up his neck. The girl really had no filter. Lou was already headed for the bar. She hopped on a stool, propped her elbows on the counter, and asked, "Theo, can I have the good juice?" As if she hadn't just dropped a social bombshell. Dylan dared a glance at Zane. His jaw was set tight, and a faint color touched his cheekbones. Otherwise, he was perfectly controlled. "She's," Dylan started. "Lovely. You've raised her well." "Thank you." Then Lou spun around on her stool and added, very helpfully, "I also told him I want him to be my new daddy because he helped me with my math, and my last one was bad at helping." The silence that followed was absolute. Dylan realized distantly that Theo had disappeared entirely behind the counter. Coward, absolute coward. Zane's blush deepened. For the first time, he looked like he didn't have a plan. "Upstairs," Dylan muttered, gesturing toward the steps. "Now, let's go now." Zane moved first. Dylan followed, resisting the urge to look back at his daughter, who was certainly looking very pleased with herself. Dylan's office was on the 2nd floor, right above the bar. It smelled like turpentine and old paper, and the south-facing window threw a wide stripe of afternoon light across the desk. Canvases in various states of finish were propped against every wall. Taped to the lamp was one of Lou's drawings, crayon, enthusiastic, and anatomically ambitious. Zane stood in the center of the room and took it all in with the same quiet attention he'd given Lou's mouthbook. Dylan took the chair behind the desk and gestured to the one across from him. Zane sat. Silence. It was the specific kind of silence that follows a 6-year-old announcing she wants to adopt a stranger. Dylan let it breathe for a moment, deciding he'd spent enough of his life letting uncomfortable moments sit unchallenged. "Well, I'd like to apologize for how I acted before. It was totally bonkers," he said. "It was," Zane agreed. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small envelope. He set it on the desk, precise and deliberate. "I'm here, Mr. Wate, on behalf of Hallen and Raymer Investments to formally apologize for your experience during last Thursday's site visit. You were approached aggressively by a company employee. That is not acceptable conduct. I'm sorry it happened." Dylan looked at the envelope, then back at Zane. "Is that an apology letter or a non-disclosure agreement?" The corner of Zane's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the structural groundwork for one. "It's an invitation letter. You can read it." Dylan didn't pick it up yet. "And Nate?" "Suspended, pending investigation. His promotion is on hold indefinitely." Zane delivered the facts like they were already settled. "He broke the law and crossed boundaries. The company takes that seriously." Dylan leaned back. Below them, the jaws drifted up through the floorboards, unhurried and low. Unfortunately, the company decided the building contract should move to another studio, Zane continued, but I would still like to commission your studio work for a charity project, an indoor kids playground downtown, sponsored by the firm. Dylan was caught off guard. This was actually a better deal than the original lobby commission. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to work anywhere near my ex. I will personally supervise this project, Zane said firmly. I can assure you nothing like that will happen. This is more of a family project than a corporate one. Dylan turned the envelope over in his fingers. Then I will accept. They should have wrapped it up there, shooken hands, exchanged details, and moved on. Instead, Dylan heard himself ask, "Why did you invest in the Gilt back then?" Zane actually took a moment to think. The revenue numbers were excellent for a first-year venue, and Theo is a gifted strategist, he said. The concept was original, and the art, he paused. Dylan waited. The artwork had a quality I don't often encounter. It was doing something the market wasn't asking for yet. His eyes drifted to a canvas near the window, the one Dylan hadn't finished yet. I tend to invest early in things I think will matter later. Dylan absorbed that. It was praise wrapped in so many layers of logic that it almost wasn't there. Almost. Well, I'll take that as a compliment. It is. Dylan laughed, a real one, short and surprised. You really are unsettling. He leaned forward on the desk, more comfortable now than he should be. For the record, I don't usually lead with assault. I do have a sweeter side. Zane offered a small, rare smile. I'm aware. I've seen it in your work. The words settled right between Dylan's ribs. He tried to think of a comeback, but for once he was genuinely flustered. So, Zane began, his voice shifting just a fraction, still measured but with a new resonance. For an omega, he caught himself, the word hanging in the air for a second before he shook his head and started again. Actually, I find I like whatever's wrong with you. Dylan blinked. Dang, this dude can flirt. It was the strangest thing anyone had ever said to him, but it felt more like the truth than anything he'd heard in years. I have a lot wrong with me, Dylan challenged. He nodded, composed. Don't we all? He said it without any apparent awareness of how disarming it was. Dylan just stared at him while the jazz downstairs shifted to something slower. There's a place on Archer Street that does a mean shawarma lunch, Zane said, gathering his jacket. I think you and Lou would enjoy it very much. Dylan watched him straighten his cuffs. Is that an invitation? It is. Dylan thought about saying no, about professional distance and keeping things simple, but he was well and truly charmed. She'll probably love it, Dylan admitted. I hope so. Lunch was a pleasant surprise. Not only was the food excellent, the kind of neighborhood place that didn't need to advertise, but Dylan had spent the last hour observing Zane Raymer, and the picture was far more interesting than he'd expected. Zane was precise, yes. He studied the menu and ordered carefully, checked for allergies, and answered Lou's interrogation, and there was no other word for it, with complete patience. When Lou asked why he wore a watch if his phone also told the time, Zane explained the difference between preference and redundancy so clearly that Lou just nodded. Oh, she said, like how I have 2 blankets. Exactly like that, Zane replied. Lou looked at Dylan over her sandwich with an expression that clearly said, you could never have explained it that well. Dylan really needed to teach this girl some respect, though that had never stopped her before. He watched Zane refill Lou's water glass without being asked, watched him smoothly redirect the conversation whenever Lou's questions edged toward Nate, doing it without drama or performance. He was just genuinely, quietly there. It was, Dylan thought, a very specific kind of dangerous, the kind that sneaks up on you. Nate was a shadow he'd have to deal with, but Zane was a light he hadn't seen coming. Watching the midday light catch the edge of Zane's glass, Dylan felt the heavy, familiar weight of his past start to shift. Maybe his return to Millivan wasn't going to be the disaster he'd braced for, a cycle of old bitterness and bad memories. Instead, it was starting to feel like a clean slate. Something new could actually grow here. It was a complication he hadn't planned for, but one he found himself surprisingly ready to accept. He didn't entirely mind at all. Lou, Dylan murmured as Zane paid the bill over his objections, what do you actually think of him? Lou licked jam from her finger and considered the question with great seriousness. I think, she said, that he has a superhero vibe. He's very good, like you, but more adult. Dylan rolled his eyes and let out a huff, looking across the table. Zane was signing the receipt, oblivious, or pretending to be. She's barely 6, Dylan thought, and she might be the sharpest person in this room. The entanglement. The Gilt did brunch on Sundays because Theo had decided one morning that they were leaving money on the table. Dylan had been too tired to argue, and it turned out to be a good call. The weekend crowd was softer, slower. People who wanted eggs Benedict and a mimosa while they admired the art on the walls. Lou had appointed herself the unofficial brunch ambassador. This mostly meant she wore her pink tutu over her jeans and circulated through the tables with the gravity of someone conducting a state inspection. When Zane walked in, Dylan was behind the bar restocking citrus. He looked up and his chest did a small, annoying lurch. He told himself it was the caffeine. He definitely had too much coffee. Zane was in weekend clothes, dark jeans and a sage green sweater, looking effortlessly attractive. He scanned the room with that measured attention Dylan was becoming familiar with, was quickly seated, and dived into the menu. Dylan picked up a cup before he'd even made a conscious decision to do it. He poured, walked over, and set it down. Zane looked at the coffee, then at Dylan. I haven't ordered yet. I know, it's on the house. Dylan noticed the reserved sign on the table was written in purple crayon. He hadn't put it there. He had a sinking feeling he knew who had. How did you know I take it black? Zane asked. Dylan offered a small smile. You look like a black coffee person. Zane held his gaze for a beat, his expression unreadable but intense. I am. Lou materialized from behind the bar like a small tutu-clad specter. She was carrying Jur, her most prized possession and companion, through 2 hemispheres. She placed the octopus on Zane's table with the solemnity of a peace offering. Zane looked at the toy, then at Lou. His name is Jur. He likes you, she announced. That's very kind of him. Jur knows the good people, she said, climbing into the chair across from him with practiced efficiency. She pointed at a large mixed-media piece on the far wall, the one with layers of newsprint and copper wire. That one took Daddy a lot of months. He cried a little at the end. I did not, Dylan defended, a bit too fast. He caught himself and saw Zane watching him with an expression hovering between amused and carefully neutral. Can I get you something to eat? Whatever you'd recommend, Zane said. The heart pancake, Lou proposed. Dylan closed his eyes briefly. Heart pancake? Zane questioned. Daddy makes them for me because I have all his love. I told him he should share the love, especially with you. Dylan wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He needed to have a long talk with Lou about appropriate conversation topics. Wait, he knew exactly who had taught her the word especially. Theo was a menace. I'll put your order in. Dylan retreated to the kitchen with what remained of his dignity. He expected Zane to finish and leave. He didn't. Zane was the last to leave. The afternoon crowd had thinned, then emptied. Theo was cashing out the register and the kitchen staff were wrapping up. Lou had fallen asleep in the window booth with her drawing pad over her face, the way she'd done since she was small, like a bird tucking its head under a wing. Dylan was wiping down the bar when Zane approached, his jacket draped over one arm. Thank you for all of this. I should be the one thanking you. Zane offered a small, real smile, one that flashed a quick dimple and reached his eyes before disappearing just as fast. In the booth, Lou stirred. Without fully waking, she held a piece of paper in Dylan's direction. Zane, she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. Dylan took the page and passed it over. It was a drawing in purple and yellow crayon, 2 tall figures standing in front of what was recognizably the Gilt, with a tiny tutu-wearing figure visible in the window. Zane studied it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, right over his heart. Dylan watched the movement, a sudden ache blooming in his chest. He thought without meaning to, if I had married someone like him, if Lou had grown up with this. He cut the thought short. It was a dangerous road to walk down. Same time next week, a small voice drifted from behind the drawing pad. Lou wasn't asleep at all. Lou, Dylan warned softly. Just saying, she whispered from behind the safety of her drawing pad. Zane's mouth curved. He looked at Dylan, a quiet, careful expression that seemed to both ask permission and acknowledge everything Lou had just implied. He wasn't pushing, he was simply waiting to be invited further in. Dylan felt a sudden, rare helplessness. He could only offer a small, shy smile in return. Same time next week, Zane agreed. He walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. The little bell above it rang once, leaving the room feeling much emptier than it had a moment ago. The call came Monday evening, just after closing. Dylan had known it was coming. He had formally filed the police report and initiated the civil suit through his lawyer last week. He had given Nate enough grace. He let it ring twice, then answered. Dylan, I'm glad you picked up. I've been wanting to touch base. Touch base, as if they were colleagues. Nate, what can I do for you? I've been thinking there seems to be some confusion about the house sale. I wanted to clear the air. I think you know I handled the transaction in our best interests. I forwarded your share. There might have been a delay in the reception. There's really no need for you to report this or sue. Dylan leaned against the bar. The Gilt was quiet around him, draped in the good dark that came after a long day. The chairs were up, the floor was swept. He'd already sent Theo home, or so he thought. You didn't, and I'm not interested in your money, Dylan said, his voice flat. I want my house back. Dylan, don't be difficult. I know you may hold a grudge. Nate, I'm not interested in your excuses. I gave you every chance to fix this, and you chose to ignore me. From now on, contact my lawyer for any further communication. Nate shifted tactics then, smooth as a lane change. I think you need to be careful about the direction you're taking this. You've already damaged my career, and now you're making baseless allegations. I could argue reputational damage, mental distress, stalking. Do you know what kind of lawsuit costs? The time, the discovery. Nate, Dylan's voice was remarkably calm. How much does Sarah's family know about how you do business? Specifically, Senator Lohman. The line went deathly quiet. You're marrying into the Lohman family, Dylan continued. I imagine they've done their due diligence and you've covered your tracks. But I wonder what happens to your marriage when they find out about all this. Nate muttered something Dylan didn't quite catch, a hissed curse or a final threat, and hung up. Dylan set the phone down on the bar. His hands were shaking just slightly, the familiar, bone-deep exhaustion of dealing with that man. Theo appeared from the back. He'd never actually left. He stepped behind the bar without a word and placed a steady hand on Dylan's shoulder. No commentary, no advice. He just stood there in the dark. Dylan let out a long breath and leaned into the support. After a moment, he spoke. I recorded it. Good, Theo said firmly. It will be over soon. The playground project began in mid-October. Dylan initially expected Zane to be a distant, professional contact who would merely approve sketches and sign paperwork. That assumption proved entirely wrong. Zane visited 4 times in 2 weeks, ostensibly to check progress, but actually to keep Lou company in the office. By the start of the installation, he and Lou were inseparable. Installation started on a Thursday evening. Zane was already present, helping Dylan place components according to the site plans. They worked together with an unexpected, natural ease. Lou was there too, sitting on a drop cloth with her drawing pad until she fell asleep. Zane moved her with the straightforward care of someone who had done it 1,000 times, settling her comfortably against Dylan's jacket on the floor. The man had infiltrated their day-to-day life with terrifying efficiency. Dylan often lost track of the hours as their professional boundaries blurred over shared takeout containers. Zane's once unreadable gaze had softened, settling into a warm, supportive presence that felt like a spotlight rather than a scrutiny. He didn't perform interest, and he never pressed past Dylan's boundaries. He simply held space for him in a way that felt remarkably, dangerously rare. They talked about the installation first, the color logic, and the specific purple Lou had insisted on, and then about everything else. One night, Zane asked how Dylan had ended up in Lisbon. Dylan told him the truth. He wasn't sure why he let it all out, but he did. The marriage, the gradual erosion, the morning he realized he'd spent 4 years in a life designed to keep him small. He told him about the daughter he'd carried abroad to rebuild a world around, and the house he hadn't known was being sold from under him. Zane listened with his full attention, without performing empathy or interrupting. When Dylan finished, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. "I kept wondering which parts were real," Dylan admitted, staring at his coffee. "How could I not see the signs? It's a torturing process." "And?" Zane prompted. "Some of it was real. I mistook lust in comfort for love for a while. So did he, I think." Zane was quiet for a moment. "How's Lou with it?" Dylan almost smiled. "She's taking it like a champ. He was barely around after she was born, so to her, he was essentially a stranger who slept over from time to time. She has much stronger opinions about art than she does about him." Zane made a sound that might have been a laugh, low and intimate. They sat there for a long time, the only sound the hum of the industrial heaters and Lou's soft, rhythmic breathing. The silence didn't feel like a void they had to fill. It felt like a weight settling, comfortable and heavy. In that stillness, the air began to change. It started as a faint pull at the back of Dylan's throat, a softening he didn't even realize was happening. The crisp, protective scent of cherry blossom and citrus began to slip out against his will, losing its sharp edge and taking on a sweet, cloying note. It was the unmistakable marker of an omega's interest. Across the takeout containers, Zane went still. He felt the shift too. Dylan knew it immediately and wanted to flee. Why do pheromones have to sell you out like this? Neither of them spoke. The industrial work lights were unromantic and bright. The installation sat half-finished on the walls. Lou turned over on her drop cloth and announced, without opening her eyes, "Daddy, you suddenly smell so sweet and milky." "Go back to sleep," Dylan croaked. It smells really good." Dylan furtively glanced up, only to find Zane's gaze locked onto him. A blush crept up Dylan's neck, hot and undeniable. The cat was out of the bag. He didn't reach across the space, not yet, but he didn't look away either, and that, he understood, was already a beginning. The plan was objectively brilliant. It was also reckless and potentially dangerous. He was about to offend one of the most powerful families in Millivan. But Dylan was done fighting in the shadows. He wanted to rip the hypocrite mask off Nate Hale once and for all. The presentation was 42 slides of meticulous receipts. It wasn't just a grievance, it was an indictment that stripped Nate's good guy persona to the bone, concluding with a final, devastating question. Did you know who you were marrying? Theo had handled the logistics. A contact who coordinated Loman events and had her own reasons to dislike Nate had placed them on the catering staff. By 7:30, Dylan was moving through the estate in pressed black service attire, a wireless clicker in his pocket and a cold, specific calm in his chest. He had been planning this for 6 months. He was ready. Then he looked up from the drink station and saw Zane Raymer. Zane was standing 30 feet away in a burgundy suit, holding a glass of champagne and staring directly at him. The calm evaporated. Zane's expression wasn't angry or amused. It was searching, a look that asked 1,000 questions before a word was formed. Dylan held his gaze for 2 seconds, then turned and walked briskly toward the staff corridor. He made it through the door before exhaling. Problem? Theo materialized beside him, carrying a tray of canapés with the serenity of a man born to serve hors d'oeuvres at enemy engagement parties. Zane is here. Theo's serenity flickered. As a guest? Seriously, Theo? Dylan pressed his back against the wall, a hand to his chest. What do you think I'm panicking for? Theo laughed unceremoniously. Dylan tried to kick him. Theo dodged with a grin and held up his hands in a peace offering. Okay, we proceed anyway. Projector is live. The screen drops at 9. The door opened. Zane stepped into the corridor. His gaze moved from Theo's tray to Dylan's uniform to the laptop bag slung over Dylan's shoulder. His expression completed a rapid, quiet calculation. Could I have a moment? Zane said. It was polite, but it wasn't a question. Theo glanced at Dylan, received a small nod, and retreated with the dignified poise of someone who was absolutely going to eavesdrop from around the corner. Zane waited until they were alone, his eyes steady. What are you doing here? Catering. Dylan. The way he said the name, even and low, did something Dylan hadn't budgeted for. He looked at the middle distance, then back. We're crashing the party, a presentation on Nate. Every person in that room is going to know exactly who he is tonight. Zane went quiet, his mind clearly forming a counter-argument. Then he reached out and took both of Dylan's hands in his. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that Dylan forgot to pull away. Dylan, it's a smart plan, truly. Zane's voice was low, stripped of its usual unshakable steadiness. But I can't stand the thought of you trading your dignity for a man who isn't worth a second of your time. If you do this, you're opening your oldest wounds for a room full of people who don't deserve access to your pain. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a raw, aching murmur. Please, don't let him make you a spectacle. You fought so hard to be whole again. Don't break yourself just to hurt him. He squeezed Dylan's hands, his thumb brushing over his knuckles. Let me take the weight of this. Give me a chance to handle him in a way that keeps you and Lou safe. You've done enough. Dylan had prepared for an argument or a threat. He hadn't been prepared for this. The tears came without permission, tracing warm lines down his face while he stood there helpless to stop them. He hadn't cried in front of anyone since his father's funeral. He had spent years building a wall, functional, architectural, and strong. Zane didn't say anything. He simply wrapped his arms around Dylan and held him. No commentary, no empty reassurances. He was just present and warm, his scent wrapping around Dylan, clean, deep, and calming. Tonight, this man had completely disarmed his defenses. Dylan didn't know what to do with that, so he simply leaned deeper into the embrace. The parking lot. Dylan notified Theo that the plan was off. Theo took the news with the resignation of a man who had just lost his front row seat to the neighborhood drama. He accepted the clicker and the wordless, apologetic look Dylan gave him, then went to inform their contact that the presentation wouldn't be needed. For what it's worth, Theo murmured before disappearing back toward the kitchen, I think you found your forever tonight. Dylan didn't dignify that with a response, though his face heated. He and Zane slipped out the side entrance into the cool night air. The estate grounds were calmer out here, lit by soft path lighting, the sound of the party reduced to a warm hum behind thick stone walls. Dylan breathed steadily, hands deep in his pockets, unsure of what to say. They were halfway across the parking lot when a voice cut through the quiet. Dylan. Nate walked toward them with unhurried confidence. He barely glanced at Zane, his gaze laser-focused on Dylan with a familiar, condescending tilt of his head. I thought I saw you in there. Are you so desperate for my attention that you had to crash my engagement party? Don't flatter yourself, you idiot, Dylan snapped. He reached over and closed his hand around Zane's wrist, pulling him toward the car. We're leaving. So that's the angle now? Nate's voice sharpened, catching that ugly, jagged edge Dylan knew too well. Whoring yourself out to Raymer just to get back at me? Zane went rigid beside him. Watch your language, Mr. Hale, he said, his voice dropping into something menacing and precise. And need I remind you, I am still your... Dylan didn't wait for him to finish. He stepped past Zane with a blurred, fluid motion. His knee came up with clean, economical force. Nate Hale, alpha, social climber, thief of houses, folded in half with a sound that was less a howl and more of an expensive, breathless wheeze. Good luck explaining to your fiancé, Dylan said pleasantly, looking down at the crumpled man, why you can't enjoy your engagement night. He grabbed Zane by the elbow. Walk. Zane matched his pace without a word. Behind them, there was only the sound of Nate making the grass his new best friend. They reached Theo's car at the far end of the lot and stopped, leaning against the side panel. The night settled around them, enormous and dark. You're remarkably hot-tempered, Zane commented. He sounded less shocked and more deeply amused. Dylan felt the blush creeping up his neck. Sorry, he bugs me so much. I just want to hit him every time I see him. Well, Zane said, a slow grin spreading across his face, the most relaxed Dylan had ever seen him. I'll make sure to stay on your good side. Dylan playfully shoved his shoulder, laughing. Zane caught his gaze, watching him with that same steady, warm attention he'd given him all night. Dylan's heart went wild. I won't ever hit you, Dylan promised softly, his eyes saying the rest. If you behave. Yes, boss. Zane considered him for a moment, then pulled off his jacket and settled it around Dylan's shoulders. Dylan was immediately enveloped in Zane's scent, sharper and hotter up close, sinking into the fabric and then into Dylan's skin. They waited in a charged silence, shoulder to shoulder. At some point, Dylan couldn't have said when, Zane's hand found his. Their fingers tangled together, easy and unhurried, like a question that had already been answered in a language neither of them had spoken aloud. When Theo's footsteps finally echoed nearby, they separated instinctively. Theo looked between them once, unlocked the car, and slid into the driver's seat without a word. Dylan handed the jacket back to Zane, the loss of the warmth immediate. Thank you again for tonight. See you Monday. Have a good night, Dylan, Zane replied, holding the car door open for him. You too. As Theo pulled out of the lot, the silence in the car was heavy and electric. Dylan watched the estate retreat in the window, catching one last glimpse of Zane in the rearview mirror, a steady, half-lit profile, eyes following our car until they turned the corner. Theo, who missed absolutely nothing, glanced at the mirror. So, Theo asked after a mile, what exactly is going on with you two? Dylan watched the reflection dissolve into the city lights. He exhaled, slow and quiet, a feeling of peace and giddiness blooming in his chest at the same time. You were right, Dylan whispered, a small smile playing on his lips. I found the one. Theo made a sound that wasn't quite a word, a grunt of pure smug satisfaction, and Dylan looked out at the night, finally feeling like he was home.
3 days after the engagement party, Dylan received a text from Zane that was as concise as the man himself. Dinner tomorrow night. Karish Kitchen, private room, 8 p.m. Bring your presentation and receipts on Nate. Dylan stared at the screen for a full minute, then went to find his laptop. The restaurant Zane had chosen was the kind of place where menus had no prices and the waitstaff moved like shadows. Dylan arrived in his important meetings coat, the dark green one Lou loved, with a folder under his arm and a USB drive in his pocket. He was led to a private dining room, pushed open the door, and stopped dead. Zane was already seated. Beside him sat a man Dylan recognized immediately, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and radiating an imposing presence. Senator Dave Lohman, former mayor of Millivin and, more importantly, the father of the woman Nate was planning to marry. You could have warned me, Dylan hissed under his breath as he pulled out his chair. It wouldn't have mattered, Zane replied calmly, not even looking up from the wine menu. Once the appetizers were served, Zane went straight to the point. He asked Dylan to show the senator everything. Dylan walked them through the surgical autopsy of Nate's character, the documented fraud of the house sale, the recorded phone calls, and the police report. When Dylan reached the paternity documents for Lou, The senator set down his glass and didn't pick it up again. "I'm not here to burn anyone down," Dylan said, his voice even and steady. "I know Nate used part of those funds to support your last campaign. I have no issue with you or your family. I just want my home back, and I want the lies about my daughter to stop." Across the table, Zane folded his hands, his posture relaxing into something more personal. "Uncle Dave," he said, the familiar title hanging in the air like a bridge. "Because of that, I wanted to come to you privately. I'd like to give you the chance to handle this quietly to protect Sarah and your family's name before any of this becomes public record." He paused, his gaze soft but steady. "I'm asking this as a favor to both of us. I don't want to see your daughter tied to someone like this. I've already handled the professional side. Nate's performance review at Hallen and Raymer has been completed. He will be dismissed on Monday. I'm hoping you'll help me ensure the rest of this transition is just as seamless for Dylan." The senator was quiet for a long moment, recalibrating. "Give me a week before you announce the dismissal," he said to Zane. "I need to clear the house first." He turned to Dylan. "I'll see to it that the property dispute is resolved. In exchange, you settle with Nate quietly and keep this out of the press." Dylan held his gaze. "As long as Nate leaves me and my daughter alone, I have no reason to say a word." He let it beat past, his eyes turning to ice. "But if he doesn't, the lawsuit proceeds." The senator gave a short, dry laugh. "Understood." Dinner became surprisingly pleasant after that. By dessert, they were discussing the city's riverside renovation. Dylan found himself actually enjoying the conversation, realized he was finally sitting at the table he'd been excluded from for years. Later, Zane drove him home through the serene midnight streets. "You handled that well," Zane said. "I think I'm becoming a real adult." "You weren't one before?" Lou would beg to differ. Zane let out a low, vibrating laugh that sent a spark of heat through Dylan's chest. "I see." Dylan turned to look at him. "Thank you for having my back and for this solution. It's better than a slideshow." Zane kept his eyes on the road, but a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "If it helps, once you have your house back, I'm still available to help you beat him up." Dylan burst out laughing, a full, genuine, slightly undignified sound. It was the first time in months he felt truly light. They pulled up outside his building. Dylan hesitated, then turned toward Zane. "Drive safe, and thank you for everything." Zane leaned back against the headrest, his expression softening into something so warm that made Dylan's breath hitch. "I will always be on your side, Dylan." Dylan didn't think. He just leaned in and pressed a quick, lingering kiss to Zane's cheek. "You're adorable, Mr. Raymer. Good night." He scrambled out of the car and into the building before Zane could react, his heart hammering a frantic, happy rhythm against his ribs. The weight of peace. The call from his lawyer came on a Tuesday morning while Dylan was restocking the bar. "The sale has been voided," she told him, her voice professional and crisp. "The tenants will vacate within 3 months, and the settlement, the compensatory damages, comes to $500,000. He thanked her and hung up, standing there for a long moment while clutching a bottle of grenadine. A few days later, Theo texted to say that Nate had left Millivan, discreetly, without announcement. Apparently, the Lomans had made it clear that his presence was no longer an asset to the city. Dylan had thought this moment would feel like a bright, crashing wave of triumph. Instead, it felt like putting down something very heavy, something he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't a part of his own body. It wasn't victory, it was relief, the quiet, aching kind. Lou found him sitting on the floor of the office that afternoon. She'd just climbed into his lap and tucked herself under his chin the way she had since she was small enough to fit there without effort. "Are you having a bad day?" she asked, into his shirt. "No, baby," Dylan murmured, pressing his nose into her hair. "Daddy just needs a moment." Good. She went back to her drawing, and Dylan finally let himself smile. That evening, Zane came to the Gilt. Dylan set a glass in front of him before he'd even reached the stool. "You knew I'd be here," Zane said, a hint of a smile touching his eyes. "You're a creature of habit, Mr. Raymer." Dylan poured for both of them. They stayed like that for hours, the conversation moving between them like a slow tide, easy and unhurried. The bar filled and thinned, the music shifted from upbeat jazz to something low and soulful. At some point, Dylan realized it was nearly 9. I have to go upstairs. It's past Lou's bedtime. I can drive you both home, Zane offered. They went to the office together. Lou was surrounded by crayons and an architectural quantity of crumpled paper, deeply absorbed in a drawing of a dragon wearing a crown. When she saw Zane, she dropped her markers and made a beeline for him. Zane reached down and scooped her up. She settled against his shoulder with practiced ease. "You're so much stronger than Daddy," she observed loudly. "His arms always shake when he picks me up." "Did you really have to share that, young lady?" Dylan grumbled, though his heart wasn't in it. They broke into a fit of laughter, and Zane adjusted her, tucking her against his side as if he'd been doing it for years. Lou fell asleep on the short drive and was carried upstairs by Zane. They tucked her in together, as Lou had demanded, Zane smoothing a stray strand of hair from her forehead with a gentleness that made Dylan have to look away for a second. It was too much to take in all at once, the man he'd been so wary of, now so seamlessly part of his daughter's peace. In the entryway, they stood in the dim, amber light, their voices dropping to a whisper. "She really likes you," Dylan said, leaning against the doorframe. Zane looked at him, a steady, searching look that seemed to read every thought Dylan was trying to hide. "I hope she's not the only one in this household who does." Dylan felt a familiar, frantic heat climb the back of his neck. He huffed a small, nervous laugh. "Wow, Mr. Raymer, your game is remarkably strong tonight." Zane closed the distance between them slowly, giving Dylan every opportunity to move. He didn't. "I want to be part of your everyday chaos," Zane confessed, his voice dropping to a raw, aching murmur. "If you'd have me. I want to be the person you call when the day is too long and the one who helps you carry the heavy stuff." Zane reached out then, his hand cupping Dylan's jaw, his thumb tracing the line of his cheek with that same devastating gentleness he'd shown Lou. Dylan leaned into the touch, closing his eyes as the last of his defenses finally, quietly, crumbled. In the room down the hall, a small girl with strong opinions smiled in her sleep, as if she'd known all along how the story would end.